I was working in a farmers market linkage project in Uganda. The project actually failed quite badly. One of the worst loan default cases for that bank in Uganda because the farmers very much thought it was an aid project. So our system is like a corporate credit card. The borrower gets a loan. They can only use this loan to buy from related vendors. The money is paid directly to the vendors. It's basically a digital token form. There was one lady who started as a driver herself and saved up and was able to buy a vehicle. She approached us and we helped her access loans to get another vehicle. And actually, she was able to bring her husband back from abroad, drive this other bus. There is first an access to financing problem because there is a mistrust of these entrepreneurs. Banks, they are not able to lend because they would have to go manually follow up. So I think it's that mistrust and that kind of unable to have real-time monitoring that is really limiting the access to finance. So that comes back to finding a sweet spot using technology. Next year, we're actually going to start piloting our own loan products. So this time we'll be the lenders and we are starting with e-scooters. And then the goal really is to become a digital bank that is focused on last mile green lending.
I'm very impressed with what you're doing with Aloi. Can you tell me the founding story? How did it all begin with perspective, insights, the current state of the market that pushed you to do it and all of this?
Yeah, for sure. So personally for me, I was working in a farmers market linkage project in Uganda very early on in my career, actually. And it was a project where in now typical kind of like contract farming where I was working for the big agriculture company. And they were buying corn and beans, that type of commodity from farmers, and they wanted to extend their direct procurement from the farmers. So they decided to be a guarantor essentially to the loans that would get the farmers the inputs and they would increase production and then sell it back to the company. And I was brought in as a coordinator at a later stage. But the project actually failed quite badly. One of the worst loan default cases actually for that bank in Uganda in the history of that bank. I think that gave me a lot of thought about what went wrong. And after about 8 years of thinking about it, that's when the idea of Aloi came about.
First of all, like me, I'm not into farming or like understanding the whole industry and how the loans for farming would work. But can you share your insight of what do you think went wrong? What was your takeaways?
Yeah. So I think there were a few main things. One is the farmers very much thought it was an aid project. So they assumed the inputs were for free. So that was very much a miscommunication. And I think it was because the inputs were actually delivered to the farmers in the forms of bags of seeds, bags of fertilizer, right? So they just thought, oh, these were handouts. So I think the ability to really spend from your own digital wallet and be able to buy the inputs that you want from the vendors that you want, that is from your local community, is really important. And that's why we designed it into Aloi's technology, that the borrower and the entrepreneur has that power in their hands. That's one thing. And the other thing is because it was this mass buying of inputs, the farmer didn't really have a choice in terms of the kinds of seeds that would be suitable for them, what kind of inputs they wanted to use. Maybe if they wanted something different for their business that other than the standard package, they couldn't get that. That was another insight, was that even though the loans need to be monitored, they really need to be flexible enough to suit each individual. But to cater to those individual choices manually is just too much work. So how to make that more automatic.
But can you also tell me a bit about the farming like context in Uganda? Is it run by a lot of small farmers? Is it that like, what is it? Because for me, as I'm listening to the stories, like how a company that is giving loans not making sure that people understand that it's a loan, like that in itself is already quite like, what? And I think that it has a lot to do with the context, which is not necessarily familiar for somebody that is not in the market.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's illiteracy obviously is a huge problem. Definitely in the context in Uganda, at least with all of the smallholder farmers we were working with, most were 1 to 2 acre land size, right? So it's like very small scale. most people didn't have much literacy. And I think the way it was set up, just either contracts were not really enforceable, I would say, or people really mistook the contracts. I can't say for sure. It's probably a mix of both. There's definitely problems related to that. And in the middle, we discovered there was corruption from some of the farm leaders that were trusted key contacts that were supposed to spread this information, that actually had custody over all of the inputs. And they actually sold the inputs at a reduced price. So people thought they had already bought the inputs, for example, and didn't realize it was a loan they had to pay back with the output of their crops. So there was a lot in the middle that was happening. And I think that is the problem a lot with these types of value chain contract farming development projects, or even commercial farming contracts, is like you rely on these centers of information to be impartial and transparent, and that's not always the way, right? So we're seeing the same problems in coffee, and that's why actually the coffee buyer we're working with is also using us, because the payment is not transparent even for buying the crop. So there's a lot of these issues of who has power and who has access to information and how that information is kept.
But also, can you like contract farming? Because I have no clue. Can you tell a bit, like I'm unraveling this whole industry a bit backwards. How does that work?
Yeah, no, it's a very fair question. It's a very specific type of jargon, to be honest. So, for example, the company I was working with is one of the largest buyers of agriculture products across the continent, actually. And they generally bought from these middle traders, and they actually had no problems with that. There are a lot of these middle traders that just go out and buy from farmers and then aggregate it and sell it to these big buyers, right? But the company wanted to give actually more directly to the farmers, and they wanted to expand their base of direct procurement, essentially. So cutting out the middlemen, right? So they were trying to do this as a pilot, essentially. So what contract farming really means is that these big buyers go directly to farmers and say, hey, I will buy, let's say, 2 tons of maize from you 6 months from now. And then they agree on a price. Generally, it's a price a little bit above the predicted price. So for that certainty, right, and to entice the farmers. But of course, it's a set price, so that could vary also. And then the farmer can take this contract either to go to a bank directly to get a loan, or the buyer might even facilitate that on a large scale. Because there is a guaranteed outcome, a bank is more likely to lend to the farmers. So that's what contract farming is.
Okay. So this company actually wanted to lend to the farmers themselves, so that actually like the farmers are better capable of producing what the company actually wants to sell. And then just to close that chapter of the story, the company, once it buys the produce of the farmers, they typically probably export and sell it to the whole world.
That's correct.
And in general, is that a very common practice of farming across Africa, or is that also throughout the world? Because I really have no clue.
Yeah, it's actually really common. I would say, because I think in the African context, it's newer in a sense because the farmers are smaller. So buyers didn't usually work with farmers like that. So it is a newer concept. And sometimes it depends on the item, the commodity that's being produced. So it could be exported, it could be sold domestically or within the continent. So it really depends. But a lot of companies try to do this because then they can have more predictable source of the raw material, for example, if they're processing it. So I know a lot of beer factories did this in different countries in Africa, for example. So they basically have a closer relationship with the farmers that are producing it.
And you said that it took you 8 years to actually process and really understand. So was it that you were working for this company 8 years ago and you were doing something else in between? Or what about that part?
Yeah, so I did leave the company. So I was brought in the middle of the project and it was fast sinking. And I tried to manage everything, but it wasn't really working. And I was quite burned out actually at the end. And they actually closed down the pilot project and had to restart a few years later. I did leave and I joined some other aspects of my work that I've experienced. And At the time, I was still more interested in development in general, and I wasn't specifically into agriculture or economics or like informal sector entrepreneurship. I went to work for some NGOs, some governments, and then ended up mostly at the World Bank. That was the few years in between, but then this problem just kept coming back, right? Like I kept seeing it again and again in the market and hearing stories and experiences from people I knew. It really only came together when I had the chance to go to the US and join this program that was about technology and solving world problems. So that was when like it came back up and I was like, whoa, wait a minute. These things can combine and possibly work.
Okay. And have you always known that you will create something of your own? What was the internal final push for you? Obviously, like a lot of things are coming together, but like in yourself, within you as a person, what was that drive that actually ticked and pushed you to going your own company way?
Yeah. I was always curious, and I actually had another company before Aloi. So it was in Tanzania. I had another co-founder. It was also in tech and informal sector work, but it was more of a job matching platform for technicians, right? People who were repairing things, plumbers, like factory workers, like that type of jobs. And so that I initially joined, it wasn't my idea to start. It was my co-founders, and I initially joined as just curiosity. But more and more it became really interesting. And actually, the concept of social entrepreneurship was just fascinating to me. And I really started liking the concept. Honestly, when I started with that company, I wouldn't even call myself an entrepreneur. I refused when people said I was an entrepreneur. So I was a little bit hesitant. But yeah, it really grew on me.
Yeah. So, Aloi, tell me, what do you do and how do you solve those major issues with procurement and financing of farmers?
I mean, we definitely agriculture is main focus, but we also see this in many other sectors and across informal sector entrepreneurship in general, right? There is first an access to financing problem because there is a mistrust of these entrepreneurs. And second, when financing is given, it's either like a very kind of group guarantee model, right? Where you can only get limited capital and you can't really be able to really grow your business. And it takes a long time to get enough capital with the group if you don't have the collateral, if you don't have that background already. And then in addition to that, like the procurement side is still a problem. Banks, they are not able to lend because if they do lend, then they would have to go manually follow up and see if the things that the entrepreneur said they would buy is actually bought. So I think it's that mistrust and that kind of unable to have real-time monitoring that is really limiting the access to finance. So that comes back to finding a sweet spot using technology between flexibility of financing and increasing the financing, but also providing that monitoring function. Both the borrower having the power to buy what they want when they need it, but also executing essentially the agreement between the lender and the borrower in terms of what the loan is being used for. So that's what the technology really is bridging, and that's how it evolved from the procurement and contract farming to now.
And we're talking about the loan situation in Africa, right? You're still like focusing on the continent of Africa. But so how exactly are you solving those problems? How are you solving the trust problem? How can you tell me literally how do you do that?
So we work in Nepal now. While it's a similar problem and bottleneck, I would say in most emerging markets, it's a similar problem but applied to the Nepal context, I would say. So how we're really solving it is we always say it's like a corporate credit card almost, right? You can say, okay, using this credit card, you can only use it for company purposes. And if anything else, then it would be audited and monitored and all of that. So our system is similar to that. So the borrower gets a loan. Let's say it's an electric vehicle related loan. It's for e-scooters. So they can only use this loan to buy from e-scooter related vendors, whether that's maintenance that are related to e-scooters or insurance, buying the vehicle itself or upgrading their battery or whatever it is related to that loan. The lender essentially has the trust because they know that this loan won't be just taken and run away and use it for something else and suddenly you don't actually have a business. Although, and then if they're willing to lend to the borrower is also having the flexibility to go to this garage instead of that garage to fix their car if they like that service more. So that's the flexibility we're building in with the technology and trying to lower the level of mistrust between the two parties.
But how do you guarantee that the borrower will not just take the money and go and do whatever they want?
Yeah, because the money is paid directly to the vendors.
Okay.
So essentially, with our technology, what we can do is the loan is given out in a digital token form. It's basically a digital check that the borrower cannot really spend anywhere else except the agreed upon ecosystem of related vendors to their loan. So if we go back to the example of the farmers in Uganda, you essentially the same project, but using our system, what would happen is instead of the company having to deliver fertilizer, seeds, pesticides, herbicides, all of these inputs physically to the farmers, what they would do is essentially give the farmers a digital token loan through us. The farmers will go procure whatever they need to grow their farms at the vendors that are closest to them and at a price that they can agree on. Procure those items whenever they need it and then be able to apply them. And each farmer might buy different things. They might buy different amounts of things. They might buy things from different places. But you can be sure that all of these places are actually selling things related to farming inputs. And they're not just spending it on, building a new house. Yeah.
I can totally understand. But so basically, you are also building the trusted vendor database and kind of relations and all of that. So now you're starting in Nepal. So we can actually now talk about Nepal, let's say. So you're building the trusted vendors, and I would imagine in many different industries and aspects, because one person might need a scooter and another person might need fertilizer if they are growing something, right? So you basically have to, as Aloi, build a lot of different, like a marketplace of vendors almost.
Yeah. Yeah. So our goal is not to onboard every single vendor out there. We're different than a digital wallet. Our goal is to onboard the related vendors in the key value chains that we work in. So right now we only work in a few types of electric vehicles, right now only in the capital, around the capital area. And then in agriculture, only in coffee, dairy, and some small stores that are under one big loan. Our uniqueness actually is building these very tailored ecosystems that are specific to that industry and even to a specific lender or a specific buyer.
Okay.
So that's the uniqueness of it.
And who are the typical lenders?
Yeah, so we work with all sorts of sizes of commercial lenders. So all the way from the Class A banks, which are like Standard Chartered, NMB Bank, Nabil Bank. So these are big national banks here in Nepal. And then microfinance organizations. So these are like a different mandate under the law, essentially. So they're called Class D banks. And then also savings cooperatives, which are very small. These are essentially unions of members that have grouped together to create a savings and credit cooperative. So we're able to work with all levels of lenders, and we do.
And who initiates the demand for the loan? It's the customer itself, somebody who's taking the loan, or is it more the bank or the other type of credit institution who wants to work with certain type of businesses?
It actually goes both ways. We have both use cases. So one is groups of entrepreneurs. So let's say dairy farmers under the cooperatives that they already have established. They want a lot more financing so that they can buy more cows and increase their milk production. So then we work with them to bundle that loan to approach a larger vendor so that they can get a better deal, essentially. And for the larger vendor, we're saying, hey, you can lend to 100, 200 farmers at a time through us and much less work for you, same amount of returns, and we're managing everything, essentially giving you good real-time data. And then it goes the other ways too. From the lending side, if a lender is specifically interested in a sector. So for example, we're talking to some lenders that are really interested in increasing climate resilience. So they say, okay, let's work with climate resilience in coffee. And so then we are able to, from the lender side, reach out to the other stakeholders and be able to build that ecosystem.
Got it. And in terms of situation in Nepal, in terms of these farmers and micro entrepreneurs, are they banked? Is there proper passport system? I'm coming from the Western world, and if we went to Uganda, where a huge problem is people being unbanked or even not having proper documents and being accounted, what is the situation in Nepal like?
Yeah, it's very similar. Not everyone has an ID, so that was part of the problem in Uganda. So most of the farmers actually didn't have the proper documents for a loan. In the end, if they ran away and didn't repay, there was no legal consequences, really. It's similar here, but we are working with entrepreneurs that are a little bit more established. So we found that as a startup, we couldn't really start with, I would say, the least and most marginalized entrepreneurs. We're starting a little bit higher up where people have already established a small business and they probably have already gotten some few loans from smaller loans from microfinance, but they right now need a much larger loan so they can grow their business from a commercial bank. And we found that is really the sweet spot for us. So we're providing that linkage to jump from essentially a semi-formal financing system to a more formal level of financing. So yeah, that's our main target right now.
Got it. And in terms of the whole situation, I guess moving to the Western standards of being recorded, being recognized, having IDs and being banked, how is that situation? Is that changing at all in Nepal systematically? Is there like government push towards it? What is the context there?
Yeah, for sure. It's growing very rapidly, I would say. There is a huge push to get financial inclusion, and I would say that's growing well. But what that mostly means is they're pushing for people to get, let's say, a basic bank account at a local savings cooperative. But after that, it's not very used, right? Like they're not using it to save. They're not really getting loans from it. They might have it and it just sits there. And it's the same way with digital wallets. People might sign up, but then they never really use it again. I think the deepening of financial services is really the next step and being able to help people see the value in these financial services. Yeah, so I would say even though officially the numbers say there's a large reach, it really is not like that. Like most of the villages we would go to, no one had ever used a digital wallet, right? The closest bank or even savings cooperative branch might be 2 hours away. So yeah.
So I hear a lot of digital wallets. Even in Lithuania, we're talking about bank accounts and not necessarily digital wallets. Digital wallets is for somebody who actually has something to do with crypto and other kind of already more advanced technology. Are you seeing that potentially in Nepal as Europe jumped over the checks and the whole world jumped the checks because the cards were developed faster? Are you seeing a potential that, let's say, Nepal or even in Africa as well, there will be a jump from not having a bank account at all to all of a sudden owning a digital wallet, which is completely more kind of digital, maybe even crypto and that sort of development?
Definitely. The digital wallets I mentioned are not really crypto. So these are really simple, like Venmo, like way to load some money, transfer it, maybe pay for some bills, that type of thing. Yeah, there are many people without bank accounts in Nepal with digital wallets because you need a SIM card and you sign up. It's really not that hard. And you can start using it without even really uploading any identity documents also for smaller amounts. So it's very accessible in that way if you have a smartphone and if you have internet. Yeah, I would say that kind of leapfrog is definitely happening. But at the same time, it's not really happening, I think, one equally in all sorts of different ways, like whether it's regional, whether it's rural and versus urban or genders even. So all of that is very unevenly, but it is happening.
Okay. And when it comes to the interest rates, are you competitive in terms of what you can offer versus if some of those micro entrepreneurs would be able to get a loan from a bank or from this other institution? How are your terms comparing to the institutional interest rates?
Yeah. So we are not a lender, right? So we don't actually lend our own capital. Yeah, we are the software that provides the monitoring of that lending, and we work with lenders that lend their own capital. So actually, our terms are completely dictated by the lenders, and they vary widely across the lenders that we work with. For example, our loan interest rates actually range from 4% per annum up to 15% per annum, depending on the lender and the loan type. So for us, it's not so much competitiveness in that way. It's more because we're helping these smaller entrepreneurs get access to larger banks, the interest rates drop because the smaller lenders they already have access to are generally the more expensive and the commercial banks are less expensive. So to help them make that jump in itself is helping them lower the interest rates they have access to.
And in terms of the impact, what could you tell me about what have you already achieved? Like maybe numbers or maybe even heartwarming stories of farmers all of a sudden being able to do something that they were not able to do before.
For sure. Yeah. Overall, we're close to $800,000 in loans dispersed and monitors so far. And a lot more will be going out soon because we're starting really to find our footing and being able to set up the model in these specific value chains that I mentioned. That's really exciting. In terms of numbers, we're over 2,000 users now. And in terms of stories, there's just so many. I think one of my favorites is, so we work in these electric mini buses, are quite famous here in Nepal, and they're very much a sector actually originally started with completely women all owning and driving the mini buses 30 years ago. This is really a story. Yeah. Kathmandu at one point was like the highest per capita electric public transportation.
Fun fact, right?
I know, like you never would have thought.
Also run by women.
Yeah. Even now is almost half women, the sector, which is so unusual in public transportation, right? Every other form of transportation here or around the world really is dominated by men.
Yeah.
So yeah, in these electric mini buses, there was one lady who she started as a driver herself and then soon, like over the years, saved up and was able to buy a vehicle. And then she approached us when she found out about us, and we helped her access loans to get another vehicle. And actually, she was able to bring her husband back from abroad. Her husband had gone abroad, I forgot where, but I think in the Middle East to work. And of course, it's very hard work and the family's torn apart, which is a very common story here in Nepal. But she was actually able to bring him home and say, drive this other bus. We'll both earn a good living. I just absolutely one of my favorite stories.
Yeah.
I think another story that I really loved was we were in a very small village, one of our early pilots, and we were introducing what we were trying to do. We had partnered with the microfinance branch there. And then we took out like the small digital like feature phone, like just a small, simple phone, and was like, this is what you can use it through. And then this kind of older lady just looked at us like beaming, and she held up her own phone and she's, that's my phone. So it was, yeah, it was because I think everything else digital was always on a smartphone, and people really feel excluded, right? Like they feel scared of it. They don't want to spend money using mobile data. They're scared they're going to make a mistake. And so because we purposely chose to build it on an SMS interface so that everyone can have access to it, it really confirmed, our theory that it really needs to be inclusive. Yeah.
Wow, I can't even imagine what it is like to build such a infrastructure on an SMS based interface. That's for me in the digital space. Yeah, I like to have a nice glossy interface where I have all the buttons in all the areas. So it's a challenge in itself, probably, right?
It's a huge challenge, and it was a huge decision for us to build that way because, of course, it's actually much cheaper to build an app and easier, and you can put more functions and you can do a lot of things. But we decided it was really important that we serve the customers that are not being served, especially in rural areas where even if you have a smartphone, mobile internet is not something that works at all in Nepal. Yeah, and we are betting on the trend that even though everyone's saying smartphone growth and mobile data growth is gigantic, they've been saying that for 10 years, and I've seen it for 10 years, and it's still nowhere near the penetration that is truly inclusive. That's the bet.
So what does it mean working at Aloi? Are you still doing the field trips and are you still manually going to remote villages and actually trying to convince people to join or showing the benefits? How has that journey evolved?
Yeah, actually we are still doing a bit of that, but increasingly we're doing it through partners. That's the goal eventually, right? That we're able to be able to support our partners in terms of getting the word out and getting people onboarded. So what happens is generally we only work if we have a very good business client, essentially, because we are B2B. It's not directly to the micro entrepreneurs. So whether it's farmer cooperative union that's very large, or a lender that has the branch support at a local level, or the buyers of these products, like the coffee buyers that we work with. So it's through them, and they use their trust at a local level to gather people and to hear our message. And then if there is interest, then we proceed in terms of access to finance.
Okay. And would people, like the regular people who are the micro entrepreneurs, would they have to onboard into a platform individually to contribute to that demand of the cooperative?
Yeah. So, yeah, right now it's not like anybody can sign up. It's really, they are essentially managed through these key points of contacts that provide the support, because we also find that it's very hard to help one entrepreneur doing one individual thing get a loan, right? That's really hard. So, what we have to do is essentially bundle them 100 dairy farmers, 100 coffee farmers, that thing. And so, that's why we work in this model.
Okay. And where are you at with your journey and in terms of development, in terms of your plans for the future? What's happening and what is exciting you most about the future?
Actually, I would love to share one slide in our deck, and I'm also happy to share the whole deck if that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this is our, what we call our North Star goal. So we focus on getting green financing, right? We work in green sectors and we want to help lenders to get green financing to last mile entrepreneurs. So our goal is to build a green economy that is for all. And right now we, of course, have our software as a service platform, and that is already working with lenders and lending. And next year, we're actually going to start piloting our own loan products. So this time we'll be the lenders, and we are starting with e-scooters. So the goal is to lend out, essentially have enough capital to buy 100 e-scooters and to lend them out in a rotating way so that we can train as many entrepreneurs and to help them buy their own vehicles going forward. And then the goal really is to become a digital bank that is focused on last mile green lending.
And is that only in Nepal, or are you planning to also go abroad, or is that too early to even think about it yet?
Yeah, so it's two ways. So for the digital bank, our goal is to be established in Nepal. At the same time, our technology can be licensed and used anywhere. So we are looking for partners anywhere that want to use the technology itself, but run the implementation. And so we'll license the technology.
Okay. Huge plans, and it's very exciting. But what are the biggest challenges that you're facing? Because obviously there probably is a ton.
Yeah, there's challenges every day. There's no end to the challenges. Definitely big challenges is how to cut field costs. I think you definitely alluded to that in the question, right? The onboarding process needs to be much more automated, and through digitally access trainings and local partners that have already local networks. And so we need to be able to align those interests and be able to bring that cost down much more. So what we find very different is we see a lot of other digital solutions, like their goal is to go direct to the consumer and cut out all of the middle kind of structures of support. And we think very differently. We see these farmer cooperatives, for example, providing really essential services. So we're building technology that integrates them and uses their ability and their trust networks to the most and not to exclude them. That's our approach to that. And then definitely another part is how to, I think the reason why we are changing towards this lending our own capital and building this digital bank is over the last few years, we've realized that most of the players in the Nepali market are very traditional. So banks are traditional, microfinances are very traditional, and they are unwilling to change the ways that they are doing things, even though there's very much a lot of opportunity in a lot of sectors that we can lend to. So that's what we're banking on to build our own bank.
And is there any challenge in terms of cheating or like something dodgy happening? Because like you have to really trust the farmer cooperative that they don't treat the loan as a just a donation or something, or where's money, there's always creativity in human nature to actually come up with ways of how to trick the system. Did you have any of that considerations or examples?
Yeah, absolutely. That will happen, and humans are humans. And although so far, actually, I don't have a specific example in mind, but yeah, there are ways, of course, you can collude to get the money out of the system or like to bar people from accessing it. But I think the main point is that a lot of times these systems, they don't actually put the money in the hands of the ultimate user. By doing that, we are providing an additional layer where there is more verification. There's essentially a verification along the whole value chain of who's getting paid what, and if people agree to it. And if it's not what they actually got, they can complain and they can like bring the issue up and there's evidence. So that is the goal. And we anticipate there will be problems in the future, but definitely being able to provide that transparency is what we find the most valuable.
How about vendors? How do they consider you? How do they see you? Because obviously, for the banks, you're bringing in the customers and you're bringing in the trust. For the borrowers, you're bringing in extra opportunities that were not attainable. What about the vendors? How do they consider you?
So it's very interesting, actually. Most of the vendors are extremely interested. So what we found the biggest pain point for the vendors is that they actually often get customers approaching them saying, hey, I want to buy this. Let's say it's a solar panel. I want to buy this, but I don't have enough money. Do you know where I can get financing to buy this? So actually, some of the vendors are our biggest referrers. They tell us their customers that cannot buy their products and want financing. So right now, actually, our vendors pay us the most in terms of, bringing them new customers that have the liquidity to buy their products and being able to not have to sell their products, for example, and have the customer pay over a number of months.
And your business model, are you taking a cut of the deals or?
It's a percentage of the loans. So whether that's from a vendor side, the larger vendors pay us commission in terms of bringing them these customers. And then from the side, it's either a subscription fee or a percentage of the loan transactions.
Yeah. And for building a bank, you obviously need a lot of capital. Are you doing that from investments or working with partners?
Yeah, so for our pilot next year, we're talking to it's a smaller pilot. So we're looking at about $100,000 to $150,000 to basically raise as debt so that we can lend. And that we're working with a few companies or funds that are able to lend to companies like ours. And then in terms of the future, definitely once we prove the model out, it would be a fund that we can bring in to invest in different lenders or companies actually that are selling to micro entrepreneurs and then use our system to monitor that.
And when you're saying 100, 200,000, again, comparing to some places, it might be a very small amount, but to give perspective, what is the average income or like minimum income or like something that we can relate to when we're considering what's the size of the 100, 200,000 in terms of impact in Nepal?
Yeah, for sure. And then as an example, so we're raising that to invest in the e-scooter industry. So essentially the goal is actually we're helping women become riders with e-scooters so that they can earn a job in the gig economy or delivery companies. And the delivery companies already sign agreements with us to provide guaranteed jobs. These guaranteed jobs get about around $220 a month. And so that's about $2,400 a year. So 150,000 sounds like not very much, but that's the salary of a whole year of someone who's very happy to enter this sector because right now they get less than half of that.
And how much is an electric scooter?
Yeah, that's about $2,000. So it's like a full year's salary if they did nothing else. So it's really unaffordable. So that's why we need a loan product that is suitable for them.
Absolutely. And why Nepal after Uganda? How is it Nepal came about in your personal journey?
My co-founder is Nepali. She's our CTO and she's fantastic and has quite a reputation here as a tech entrepreneur. So when I met her in the US, that's when we started thinking about this. And actually, after that program in the US, we both went back to our own jobs and thought about it a little bit more. But then eventually, I actually came to Nepal to say, hey, let's do this together. Yeah, that's how I ended up here. But that being said, Nepal is a great market, really, for us. So there's a lot of favorable conditions in terms of the economy growing really fast, but still having space to innovate. Unlike, for example, India, the market's really saturated. We have more space here as a young startup to innovate and then also have more affordable tech talent here so that we can hire them and build our products. That's why.
And how about the tech ecosystem? Are there other kind of VCs, incubators, somebody that you can rely on, or is it all being built now?
It's definitely better than 5 years ago when we started, but it's still very nascent, I would say. And while there are VC funds, they're not as impact focused. So we actually find the most support from funds that are abroad, but more specifically impact focused. And then, yeah, they also are much more traditionally commercially minded, I would say, not as suited to especially financial technology. So that has been a bit hard, but we found that, I mean, WSA, right? Like it's global. There are programs out there that are providing support regardless of geography, and that's really helped us a lot.
And what about the females in the tech space in Nepal? Because I'm hearing you are two female co-founders, and then there is like a electric minibus service operated by females for a long time. What is the female situation and place in the society and in the whole kind of tech space?
Yeah, I would say there's very few who have females in the tech space here in Nepal. Really few. But it's definitely also growing. And it's also the reason why my co-founder gets like in fights for talks every single week, right? Because there aren't enough female representations, or she's always like the one they call. So there's definitely space to improve. But that being said, as you said, like there are industries where women also have been established, and depending on the geography here in Nepal, the culture is quite different. So we're around Kathmandu, it's what they call the hills. And then nearer to India, the border with India is the plains. And the culture is very different. So females around this area are much stronger. They're used to working. There's less restrictions culturally. So that's been really interesting and really great to see. But yeah, as we work in different areas and we have like, you can definitely see the cultural difference in terms of what females, in terms of their relationship with money, in terms of their relationship with business, it's very different.
Over the 5 years, what have been your insights really about the industry and where it's going and your personal journey in the industry?
I think the industry as a whole, and I'm just coming back from like an impact capital venture philanthropy kind of conference in Europe. So maybe I'm biased towards that, but I just see so much interest in financing companies that have impact, but it's still at a very high level. No one's really extending these financial instruments, these mechanisms down to a level that's tangible to the people actually working at the last mile. Like my entrepreneurs are actually providing like solar panels or electric vehicles or better farming. So yeah, I think there's still so much work where we need to bring that kind of capital really accessible to people.
Yeah. Actually, when I was doing the research about who are the typical winners of WSA business and commerce category, I actually like more than half were all about giving access to finance, giving access to money, making payments and transactions easier. So that's why I chose that as a subtopic of the category. And that's why we're talking to you, because really it feels like the world is set up reverse. It's people on the ground are the ones who are actually making everything happen, bringing food, bringing everything like to the rest of the society. And yet it's being so underserved. It was just like, it puzzles me really.
I absolutely agree with that. And it's crazy. You have like $100 million funds that are saying like they are impact and they want to do this and they want to encourage climate entrepreneurship and they want to include grassroots entrepreneurs. But in the end, what they all end up doing is lending to a major commercial bank in countries like Nepal and telling them, oh, you should try to lend these loans out with impact. And then what happens is, no, they don't. So we were sitting in, there's a fund here that like is also an impact fund and it's a little bit newer. And we were sitting with the managing director the other day, and he is also on the board of one of the major banks here. And that bank also actually wants to really encourage grassroots users and extend their pipeline. But what happened is he heard from one of their staff saying that actually they had this mandate that they had to lend to women micro entrepreneurs. And what the branch staff was just like found the women customers they had in their database that were already really rich and told them, please take this money and take it and put it in a savings cooperative so there's a higher interest rate and you don't have to do anything. You would earn a return. Wow. Please just take the money as a right? So because there is so much resistance to changing and risk aversion, no one's actually extending this money down to actual people doing the work, as you said. It's really unbelievable.
And also,
Yeah.
what I'm here, of course, it's so difficult to change the existing huge systems, but it really requires a system change of those huge posh people sitting in the comfortable offices to somehow going out and actually going on the ground to actually
Yeah.
live, be, and understand the actual conditions to change the systems from the ground up, really, not from the top down. Yeah, something really crazy how the world has been built.
Exactly. And it's as long as you keep sitting in those plush offices and then you keep saying, this is our criteria, we're extremely risk averse, and you have to have a million requirements to use any of our capital, then you're always going to be excluding so many people. So either we change that, which is very necessary, or we took as like build tech that would actually automate some of this and provide more direct linkage. So yeah, I think both needs to happen. Like that kind of financing must change if we are truly going to be inclusive and work with grassroots people that are providing services that are last mile.
Well, thank you so much for doing it because the world really needs that. Last tricky question for this time around. If you had a magic wand and you would be able to change any one aspect of something that you're doing, what would you do?
One problem we actually face a lot in Nepal is people are migrating a lot. It's I don't fault any individual, right? I think it's a larger systemic mistrust of the system. So anyone who can is basically moving abroad. So it's actually harder and harder to find talent. And the magic wand I would love to have is showing the opportunities of what's possible in any country. And I know a lot of countries are facing these same problems, like to stay and build it up and to change like the political system side of it to make it a more stable environment for young people.
Wow, that's awesome. Magic one wish. I hope with good examples it can happen because I think that's what we saw in Lithuania, that a lot of people left when we joined the EU. And it took like we got the independence in 1992, and it took 20 years for actually this to be reversed, that people would actually believe that there are opportunities and that they would migrate back. Or even now we have like migration of different nationalities. So yeah, having gone through that as a country, I really agree with you that it's very important and very necessary. But it takes a lot of time and a lot of political alignment with the whole kind of strategy and everything. So hopefully.
Yeah, exactly. And you're exactly right. It's that situation. And I understand, right? Everyone tries to find the best for their own lives. But you just need to, like, that trend has to reverse at some point. And I think, of course, you're also bringing in amazing connections to the world at the end of that, right? Like you're bringing in people with really amazing experiences abroad. And if you're able to entice them home, that's just going to build it stronger and stronger. So I'm not saying necessarily at this point it would be great that all Nepalis just are able to come home. But yeah, I think it's just a little bit sad. Like I just see the talent really just not being here.
Well, hopefully you can be a North Star example of like why they should come back and join Aloi in building sustainable finance to the grassroots entrepreneurs who are building, actually providing to the whole society.
Yeah, for sure. I really hope so. One of our teammates, he actually half grew up in Australia and his family keeps telling him like, come, go back. And he's, no, I'm going to stay in Nepal. And that's very interesting. I think it takes a very strong will to say that to your family.
What about you? Where is your home or heart home? Because I can understand that you have a lot of different homes depending on a phase in your life.
Yeah, that's correct. So I was born in Hong Kong and I actually lived back and forth between Hong Kong and Canada most of my life, my young life at least. And then yeah, the moment I graduated from university, I left and worked in Africa for 10 years. Yeah, like there are different countries there. It also definitely feels like home. And then I came to Nepal after that. So yeah, but I can definitely understand the draw of home. And as someone also from Hong Kong, also understand like how political systems really impact and can change very quickly and can cause a lot of people to leave at once. So I feel very deeply about that too. So yeah, I have a lot of kind of empathy to what's happening in Nepal also.
And I'm also like, I'm now everything what I do with WSA, I'm so curious to find out if it's, I don't think that it's possible, but what makes some people want to change the status quo and want to do something about broken systems versus others just going along with it and just having a job? If I could actually have a magic wand, I would love to find an answer to that.
Yeah, that is a great question. I also would like to know.
I think it's a very difficult question to answer, because even would you be able to answer it for yourself, what actually pushed you? It's probably not a straightforward single answer, really.
I really don't know. Honestly, initially there were really days I regretted it because I used to have a relatively like a job I could do. It was certainly comfortable. Yeah, but I think for me, it was those 8 years of processing this idea. And then once it formed in my mind, it just wouldn't leave me alone. It just, a night, that was it. And like, I knew if I didn't at least try it, I would never be satisfied. And so I started trying it, and then it just kept going. And now today we're here.
And with that, I want to invite you to follow Aloi and share their story with your network to hopefully amplify their important mission of bridging the gap between the big funds wanting to invest and support the grassroots and the systemic barriers that prevent capital reaching those micro entrepreneurs on the ground. Because sharing their story is your potential contribution to that mission. On that note, next week I will be bringing you another story from the edge of impact. We will hop all around the world to Brazil, where a team of 4 co-founders is changing the game on multiple levels in the favelas. See you next week at the Edge of Impact.